Clint Barrow never meant to buy a woman. He came to Cold River's auction looking for fence wire and seed. Instead, he spent his last $3 on a ragged stranger with haunted eyes. She said her name was Evie Quinn, but when Clint saw her carve Eden into a fence post, his past came roaring back. 15 years gone, and she still carried the same pain. Now, danger rides close, and his children are watching. Will the ghosts of what they lost tear him apart, or forge a family stronger than steel? A worn wanted poster, a carved oak ring, and a name whispered like prayer. Can $3 buy redemption? The wind at Cold River's winter auction had teeth. Clint Barrow pulled his coat tighter as he stepped down from the wagon boots, crunching on frozen dirt. His list was simple fence wire, a sack of seed oats, maybe a salt block for the mule. He wasn't looking for conversation, and he sure as hell wasn't looking for a woman. But sometimes, the West don't ask what you're looking for. He tipped his hat at old Mr. Harlan behind the livestock pen and made his way past a makeshift wooden platform where a crowd had gathered. Most auctions here were for livestock or tools, maybe a busted plow, a worn saddle, but today someone brought something else. Someone brought people. Clint paused at the edge of the group. Up on the platform stood 3 women, 2 younger, 1 older, and all 3 wrapped in 2 thin shawls for the Wyoming wind. Their eyes told different stories. The youngest looked too scared to meet anyone's gaze. The oldest glared like she'd bite through her ropes. But the middle one, tall, broad-shouldered, with copper hair tied back in a rough knot, stood still. Her face was unreadable, like she'd stopped expecting anything at all. A man in a green coat barked, "Starting at $5. Who'll take this one off our hands? Strong back, no trouble, calls herself Evie." The crowd shifted, murmured, but no hands rose. Clint glanced down. The woman didn't flinch, didn't beg. The man tried again, a little less sure. Hell, she'll work herself to the bone for $3. Still nothing. Some folks turned away, others snickered. Clint wasn't thinking, not really. His boots moved before his head caught up. "I'll take her," he said. The auctioneer squinted. "You didn't didn't ask for your opinion," Clint replied. He pulled $3 silver from his coat pocket, his last. He hadn't meant to spend them today, much less on a stranger. The man shoved Evie forward, nearly knocking her off the platform. She caught on her balance without help, brushed past Clint, and didn't look at him once. Clint hesitated, jaw tight. "You hungry?" "I've eaten," she muttered, though her voice cracked like dry kindling. "Rain's comin'. Get in the wagon." She didn't argue. The ride back to the Barrow place was quiet, except for the creak of the wheels and the occasional cough from the mule. Clint didn't ask where she came from, didn't ask why she was up on that platform. Folks had reasons. Some just weren't safe to speak out loud. The land stretched wide and colorless, all snow patches and winter dust. His ranch sat a few miles east, nestled at the foot of a low ridge, 2 fenced acres, a narrow creek, and a barn that leaned like an old man with secrets. It wasn't much, but it was his. And it was home to Benny and Lila, his 2 reasons for not riding off into nothing after Sarah died. As they crested the last hill, thunder growled behind them. Evie turned, slightly squinting at the clouds. "Storm'll hit before night," she said. "Hope you know how to handle a lantern," Clint answered. "That barn don't light itself." She didn't smile, but she nodded. When they pulled into the yard, Benny came running out, hair wild, 1 boot missing. "Pa, the mule's got into the corn sack again." "Who's that?" Clint climbed down. "This here's Miss Quinn. She'll be helping out for a while." The boy eyed her, then stepped behind his father's leg. Lila peeked through the curtain from the cabin window, then vanished. Evie stood still in the wagon bed. "If it's all right," she said slowly, "I'd prefer to sleep in the barn." Clint raised a brow. "Barn's cold. I'm used to cold." He didn't argue, just gave her the extra quilt from the cabin and pointed her toward the hayloft. Later that night, as the wind howled through the shutters and the children huddled close, Clint stepped onto the porch and watched the storm roll in. A flash of lightning lit the yard, and for a second he saw her silhouette through the barn slats. She was standing, not lying down, still wrapped in that thin coat, just watching the rain. And carved into the wooden beam beside her, barely visible in the flash, was a name. Eden. Clint's heart kicked against his ribs. He hadn't heard that name in 15 years, and he never thought he would again. By morning, the storm had left its mark, ice clinging to the fence rails, chimney smoke curling slow in the brittle air. Clint Barrow stepped onto the porch with a mug of weak coffee and squinted at the barn. The door was open just a crack. She was already working. Evie or Eden, if that name still meant something, was hauling water from the creek, her sleeves soaked to the elbows. She moved like someone who didn't need to be told what needed doing. No complaints, no conversation. Clint respected that, maybe even needed it. Inside the cabin, Benny chewed his biscuit, slow eyes flicking to the window every few bites. Why is she in the barn? 'Cause she asked to be. Is she gonna stay? Clint paused. That's up to her. Lila didn't speak at all, just pushed eggs around her plate, her brow furrowed like she was solving a math problem that didn't have an answer. By midday, the routine had shifted. Evie cleaned out the chicken coop without being asked, patched a split in the woodshed door with old leather she found under the porch. She didn't ask permission, just worked quiet. And Clint didn't stop her. But trust ain't earned with chores. At supper, she sat at the far end of the table, didn't take seconds and kept her head low. Lila stared. Benny whispered when he thought she couldn't hear. After the kids were tucked in, Clint stayed behind to bank the fire. Evie stood to leave. You don't have to eat separate, he said. I don't mind. You sleepin' all right. The barn's dry. He nodded, rubbed a hand across his jaw. You carved a name last night. Eden. She froze, shoulders stiff, breath caught. That was a long time ago, she said finally. Didn't seem like nothing when I first saw you. But that name? I knew a girl once, vanished after her brother died. Evie didn't answer, just turned and walked out into the night. Next day, Clint rode into town to pick up seed. He wasn't looking for trouble, but trouble had a way of finding men who asked too many questions or stopped asking them altogether. Dry Hollow sat 10 miles south, a crossroads of dust and rumor. At Merton's General, he loaded up flower matches and a spool of thread Evie might need, though he wouldn't admit that to himself. He was about to mount up when a stranger rode in. Tall, lean, slick black coat too fine for ranch work. Sharp eyes. The man asked the storekeeper about a red-haired woman named of Quinn, or maybe something else said she might have passed through selling herself cheap. Wanted to settle an old account. Clint didn't flinch, didn't speak. Just watched from across the street, one hand on the saddle horn, the other drifting near the old Winchester slung behind him. The man moved on, headed toward the saloon. He didn't see Clint, but Clint saw enough. He rode hard on the way home. That night, he found Evie brushing down the mule. The lantern flickered shadows across her face. You know a man in a black coat. She froze again, not in fear, but calculation. Depends what he said. He's asking about you. Name passed. Called it a debt. She nodded slow. His name's Price. He was my father's man. Before everything went bad. Clint didn't press, just said if he comes this way, I'll deal with it. I don't want trouble. Neither do I. But I won't let it ride up my lane, neither. She stared at him for a long moment, the same unreadable look from the auction yard, then said quietly, Thank you. That night, Evie didn't sleep in the hayloft. She laid out a blanket by the barn door, rifle nearby, boots on. Clint saw her from the porch lit by moonlight. He didn't call her in, didn't tell her she was safe now. Because maybe she wasn't, not yet. But he kept the lantern burning in the kitchen all night, just in case she changed her mind. And across the hills far off under the cold stars, a man in a black coat asked a question in a saloon that made two gamblers stop playing cards. Ever hear of a girl used to call herself Eden Quinn? And one of them whispered, She's dead. The other shook his head, Not yet. Clint didn't sleep much after that night. He kept one ear on the wind, the other on the barn door that creaked now and then when Evie turned in her blanket. The hills around Cold River weren't known for visitors, especially ones dressed too fine and asking questions about ghosts. That kind of curiosity didn't blow in with the tumbleweeds. It was hunted. The next morning, Clint rose before the rooster. He lit the stove-ground coffee quiet and watched steam curl from the mug like it carried answers he didn't have. Benny shuffled in first. She's still in the barn, he said, rubbing his eyes. She can stay there if she wants. Lila joined them next, silent as usual, curling into the chair Sarah used to sit in. Clint glanced at the empty spot. The house still carried Sarah's shape in quiet ways, her apron on the hook, the way the cupboards creaked when opened too fast. But things had shifted just a hair since Evie arrived. And shifts could mean cracks, or they could mean healing. Clint waited until the kids went out to gather eggs before walking to the barn. He found Evie feeding the mule, her sleeves rolled up arms strong from work. She barely looked up. "Cold night," he said. "I've known worse." Clint leaned against the post. "That name Eden, I remember it from before. Town called Waverly." "You were what, 17?" Evie didn't answer. Her jaw tightened. "Your brother," he continued carefully, "was found behind that sawmill. Folks said it was over a card game gone wrong, but I remember you disappeared the next day." Evie's hands stilled. "I didn't disappear. I ran. Because of what you saw." She met his eyes then, for the first time really met them. "Because I couldn't say what I saw. Nobody would have believed me. Not in that town. You saw who did it." She nodded once. "And he's still out there." Another nod. Clint blew out a breath, slow and heavy. Price Evie's eyes turned hard. He wasn't alone, but he was the one who cleaned up after. "And now he's looking for you, not to apologize." Clint rode into Dry Hollow that afternoon, under the excuse of needing nails. He left the wagon in back of the feed store and walked the 2 blocks to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Tolan was a good man, older, slow to draw conclusions, but sharp where it counted. "You remember a girl named Eden Quinn?" Clint asked, keeping his tone low. The sheriff leaned back in his chair, squinted. "Ain't heard that name in years. Brother died nasty. She vanished." Clint hesitated. "That name show up on any posters lately?" The sheriff stood, rummaged through a drawer, and came back with a few dog-eared notices. One was fresh, hand-drawn sketch, red hair, narrow face. No name, just fugitive reward for return. Below that, wanted for questioning in the 1871 Waverly murder of Thomas Quinn. Clint's stomach dropped. "She's not a killer," he said too fast. Tolan raised a brow. "Didn't say she was, but someone's paying to make it look that way." Clint folded the poster and tucked it in his coat. "Whatever you're into," the sheriff warned, "don't get caught between the law and someone buying it." That night, Clint stood by the hearth with the kids in bed, the fire low. Evie sat nearby, needle in hand, mending Lila's torn sleeve. She didn't ask how it tore, she just fixed it. Clint laid the folded poster on the table. She didn't even blink. "You went looking. I had to know. I never touched my brother. I found him there, Clint, and I ran because I knew who did it, and because I knew what he could do to me if I stayed." He nodded slowly. "You're not a runaway anymore. You're a target." She looked up, then a flicker of fear flashing behind her eyes. "So, what now? You turning me in?" He met her gaze steady. "No, but we're not waiting around for him to find you either." For the first time, something shifted in her posture, a sag of tiredness, of relief. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me yet." He tossed another log on the fire. Sparks jumped and shadows danced. Tomorrow they'd need to be ready. Because the past had a long memory, and someone was paying good money to keep Eden Quinn buried in it. Cold River's annual rodeo was more than just broncs and barrel runs. It was the one time a year the whole valley came together, ranchers, merchants, school teachers, even the preacher from Twin Pines. Folks traded gossip like canned peaches, and a good chili pot could earn a woman more respect than a sermon ever could. Clint hadn't planned to bring the kids this year, but Benny begged for the roping contest, and Lila wanted to see the painted horses. He agreed on one condition: Evie came too. She hesitated when he asked. "I don't want eyes on me," she said, rinsing dishes in the sink. "They'll be on the chili," Clint replied. "Not you." She gave him a look. "You sure?" "No," he admitted. "But I reckon you earned one day that ain't haunted." By noon the fairgrounds were buzzing. Wooden booths lined the dirt road. Children ran wild with sticky fingers. Clint entered Benny in the junior lasso event while Lila tugged Evie's hand toward the patchwork quilt display. Clint hung back, watching from the chili tent. Evie wore one of Sarah's old calico dresses. It didn't quite fit her shoulders, but she wore it like it belonged. She stirred the pot slow, smiling politely as townsfolk wandered by. And for a time it felt normal, until Clint saw the man leaning by the fence. Eli Granger, tall tan hat boots polished to arrogance. Granger had once ridden with Clint back in their rowdier days, before Sarah, before the kids, before Clint decided that a fence and 2 children were better than whiskey and pistol fights. Granger never made the same choice. He ambled over like they were still friends. "Well, I'll be." Clint Barrow wearing clean boots and pushing chili. Clint didn't smile. "Heard you left these parts. Got bored." Granger looked past Clint. That hurt Clint didn't answer. Granger tilted his head. "You always had a soft spot for lost things." That woman, she ain't just lost. She's worth good coin to the right man. Clint's jaw tensed. You taking up bounty work now? Not officially, but word is someone east is paying fine for her return. Dead or alive depends on how much noise she makes. Clint turned slowly to face him, calm as frost. She's under my roof. That makes her not your concern. Granger grinned. I ain't here to collect. Just thought you should know what rides behind her. Clint stared at him long and steady. You pass that warning along, or are you doing the riding? Granger held up his hands. I'm just talking, Clint. Just talking. But his eyes said otherwise. Clint left early prize ribbon in Benny's hands and chili pot clean to the bottom. Evie noticed the tension in Clint's shoulders but didn't ask. The kids fell asleep in the wagon before they cleared Founders Hill. Back at the ranch, as Clint unhitched the mule, Evie stepped beside him. Something happened. He didn't answer right away, just handed her the wrapped ribbon from Lila's pocket. You did good, he said. I saw him. The man by the fence. You knew him. Used to. He stared at the mountains. He ain't the kind to ride out here just for friendly chat. Evie folded her arms. He knew my name. Clint met her eyes. He knows more than he should. And I don't think he's alone. She nodded once. Then I'll go. Tonight. Clint's voice sharpened. No, that ain't the answer. It's the only one I got. You got this place now. These kids. Me. That's more than most. Her eyes shimmered for just a breath. You didn't ask for this trouble. Maybe not, he said. But I bought fence wire once and came home with a woman stirring chili and saving my kids from silence. I'm not trading that. The air turned still between them. Finally she whispered, then we better be ready. 'Cause men like Granger don't ride alone, and they don't leave empty-handed. And somewhere across the Black Ridge a match flared in the dark. A coyote howled. The wind shifted, and smoke thin and gray rose from the distant edge of the hills. It was the smell that hit Clint first. Sharp, metallic, wrong. He stepped outside just after dawn and caught it on the breeze, burned fur and old blood. His boots crunched frost as he walked toward the barn, eyes narrowing. That's when he saw it. A coyote, dead, nailed clean through to the wooden siding, a clean shot through the ribs. Someone had taken time to display it. Evie stepped out a moment later, wrapped in a shawl, eyes still puffy from sleep. She stopped cold when she saw it. Her voice was flat. That's a warning. Clint didn't answer. Just pulled the hammer from his belt and pried the nail loose. The animal dropped with a dull thud. He met her eyes. We're leaving. An hour later, the cabin was a flurry of motion. Lila packed her rag doll in a biscuit tin of crayons. Benny grabbed 2 slingshots and the books Sarah used to read them each night. Evie rolled blankets, tight stuffed sears of preserves into sacks. Clint hauled the old saddlebags from the cellar and counted every shell twice. The kids didn't ask questions, not until they saw Clint hitching up the mule wagon and throwing in dynamite sticks wrapped in cloth. Where we going? Pa, Benny asked, his voice smaller than usual. To the mountains, Clint said. Your granddad had a mining shack up past Silver Bend. Ain't much, but it's hidden. Why? Lila clutched her doll tight. Did we do something wrong? Clint knelt down, his voice low and even. No, baby. But there's folks out there who think causing trouble is a living, and they picked the wrong family. The road into the foothills was rough, more a suggestion than a path. Snow still clung in patches along the ridge, and the wagon strained uphill. Clint rode ahead on horseback, rifle strapped across his back. Evie sat up front with the children behind one hand, always resting near the rifle beneath her coat. By dusk, they reached the split in the trail near Granger's Bluff. Clint pulled the wagon behind a thicket and walked a short ways alone scouting. He found boot tracks 3 pairs fresh. The trail ahead wasn't safe. He came back, jaw tight. They're close. Evie didn't flinch. We've still got time. They pushed forward, abandoning the wagon by the rocky creek bed and loading what they could onto backs and saddle. Benny carried a small pack of beans and a pocket knife. Lila held a lantern with trembling fingers. Evie took the lead, moving fast for someone carrying near 40 pounds. Just before sundown, they reached the ridge. Clint spotted the narrow ledge barely wide enough for one person at a time. On the other side, the old silver cabin tucked behind stone and pine. But below them, hooves echoed. Granger's men. Clint moved quick. Evie, get across first. Take the kids. I'll hold the trail. Evie grabbed Benny's hand, slung Lila onto her hip, and stepped out onto the narrow path. Wind howled. Rocks tumbled with every step. Behind them, Clint opened the burlap sack, 3 sticks of dynamite already prepped with slow fuses. He wedged them into the rock wall and lit the first with his matchstick, the spark crackling in the wind. "Move," he called. Evie made it across, just as Benny slipped. She caught him by the arm, pulled hard. The boy gasped, gripping her tighter. Clint stepped onto the ledge just as the first shot rang out, splintering bark a foot above his shoulder. He ducked, swung around the bend, and waited. Boom! The trail behind them cracked, a spray of stone and dust filling the canyon. Clint lit the second fuse. Another burst, louder this time. The path collapsed in chunks, sealing the gap. He scrambled across just before the third fuse burned low. The final boom echoed down the valley like thunder. By the time they reached the cabin, the stars were out. The shack was musty but sturdy. A stovepipe, some bunks, and a few old tools. Clint checked the back trail, his eyes scanning the ridge. Evie lit a lantern and set it on the table. The kids huddled in their coats, eyes wide. Benny whispered, "Are we safe now?" Clint sat down, slow, exhausted. Safe enough to sleep, not enough to stop watching. Evie met his eyes. "They won't quit." "I know." She opened the window just a crack. Outside, the wind picked up again, and far below where the trail used to be, something moved. The first snow came early. Thin at first, more whisper than storm, but enough to dull tracks and silence branches. By morning, the cabin at Silver Bend was buried halfway up the windows. Clint woke to the sound of wind pushing against the door, and the groan of wood settling like it carried secrets. He stepped out into the cold with his rifle and scanned the ridgeline. The trail they had blasted still held, but smoke from a fire far below told him the men hadn't turned back. Granger was patient, but he wasn't going to wait forever. Inside, Benny practiced loading a revolver under Clint's steady eye. "You remember where your finger goes?" Clint asked. "Off the trigger till I'm ready, and never aim at something you don't mean to end." Benny nodded, lips tight. He wasn't playing cowboy anymore. He was preparing. Evie spent the morning reinforcing the back windows with planks and bed sheets. Lila sorted supplies into jars and labeled them with her careful, crooked handwriting. The girl hadn't cried since they left Cold River. Clint didn't know whether to be proud or scared. By noon, the sun broke through, and so did Granger. 3 gunshots cracked through the valley. Not at them, but near enough to say, "We're here." Clint ducked low by the window. They found another way up. Evie tied her hair back with a strip of cloth. "How many?" He shook his head. "Too far to tell." They spent the next hour rigging what they could. Clint taught Benny how to set a tripwire using an old bell and fishing line. Evie packed flour bags behind the door, makeshift cover. Even Lila helped load extra shells into the old hunting satchel. It wasn't a fortress, but it was theirs, and they'd make it hold. The attack came just before dusk. Granger's men moved fast through the timber, 3 on the west slope, 2 coming from behind the ridge. Clint fired once, dropping one of the west flank riders off his saddle. The others scattered, surprised by the resistance. Evie crouched at the east window, steady hands on the rifle. When one rider crept toward the porch, she fired, sent him tumbling back into the snow. Benny watched from the corner, clutching the small revolver Clint had given him. "Do I shoot if they come inside?" "You shoot only if they cross the line," Clint said, pointing to the rug near the hearth. "Not before, not after." The cabin shook as someone threw their weight against the back door. Clint spun, fired once through the wall, heard a grunt and a thud. Silence followed. The kids huddled close. "They're testing us," Evie said. Her voice wasn't scared, just steady. Clint lit the last stick of dynamite they'd brought. "We're going to give 'em a reason not to come back." He opened the front door just enough to toss the explosive down the trail, then slammed it shut. Boom! The hillside cracked, snow and dirt cascading down like a white curtain. Screams echoed from below, fading into the trees. Then, stillness. When darkness finally took the ridge, Clint stepped outside again. His boots sank into fresh powder as he walked the perimeter. The moon hung low, cold, and quiet. He didn't see any more movement. He came back inside, brushing snow off his shoulders. Lila was asleep in Evie's lap. Benny sat at the table, still holding the revolver, eyes wide but unblinking. "You did good, son," Clint said softly. "I was scared," Benny whispered. Clint knelt beside him. "Being scared just means you know what matters. You stayed still. You listened. That's courage." Evie looked up at Clint, something in her expression shifting, like she hadn't expected anyone to teach her child how to be brave. "Granger'll try again," she said quietly. "He won't quit." Clint looked around the room, at the patched walls, the woman who carved Eden into fence posts and carried guilt like a second coat. Then we won't either. Outside the mountain sighed under snow. And far off beyond the broken ridge, a younger Granger brother heard the news. And he wasn't nearly as patient as Eli. The snow stopped falling, but the cold stayed sharp. It clung to the trees, to the cabin roof, to the breath that curled from Clint's mouth as he paced the ridge just after dawn. He didn't need tracks to know what was coming. He felt it in the quiet. Evie joined him outside, coat button tight, rifle slung over her shoulder. They're regrouping, aren't they? He nodded. You don't lose two men in a mountain pass and ride off quiet. Eli was the patient one, but his younger brother, Warren, yeah, I remember him now. Mouthy, mean, didn't care who got hurt as long as he got seen. Evie's breath fogged between them. He was there the night my brother died. I saw him. Didn't say a word, just laughed and watched. He was always the one I feared most. Clint looked at her. Then we make sure he doesn't get close. They spent the morning fortifying the cabin with what little they had. Clint used old nails and broken wagon boards to reinforce the shutters. Evie laid flour across the back threshold to show footprints if someone slipped inside. Benny rewired the trip bells, while Lila quietly sharpened a stick like a little pioneer soldier. You remember where the safe spot is? Clint asked both kids. Lila pointed under the cot. Benny added, and we don't come out unless we hear your knock. Clint smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. By afternoon, smoke rose from the southern trail, two lean columns winding up the pass. They're moving fast, Evie said from the ridge, glassing with Clint's spyglass. And hard. They're mad. Let them come. I've got something for 'em. Clint and Evie set the cabin like a foxhole, pots tied to fishing line across the north slope. Oil-soaked rags behind the woodshed ready to light. The stove was doused so smoke wouldn't give them away. At the western tree line, they dug a shallow pit and covered it with canvas and snow. Clint rigged a tin plate to rattle if a man stepped wrong. They didn't have numbers, but they had knowledge. They had a home worth fighting for. Dusk fell like a hammer. The forest went still. And then the first rider charged the back. He hit the tripwire, which yanked a hanging log from the rafters. The thud echoed like thunder. Benny flinched but held firm. Lila pressed her face to Evie's side. From the front porch came boot steps, quiet, measured. Clint crouched behind the door, revolver steady. The door creaked open. A man stepped in, bandana over his mouth, shotgun raised. Clint burst from behind the door and tackled him hard. They crashed into the table. The shotgun skidded across the floor. Evie sprang forward, yanking Benny out of the way. The man threw a punch, wild and mean. Clint ducked it, drove his shoulder into the outlaw's gut. They slammed into the stove, now cold. Warren Granger. Clint growled, pinning the man's arms. You're protecting her, Warren spat, eyes blazing. She's a liar, a murderer. Clint grabbed his collar. No, she's the only one who told the truth. Evie raised the rifle but paused. Warren looked up, almost daring her. Clint said, no. He looked at her firm. We're not him. He kills what scares him. We don't. Evie exhaled slow, then nodded. They tied Warren with rope from the cellar, gagged and bound, left him sitting in the corner like yesterday's garbage. Outside, the rest of his men heard the gunfire, but not a follow-up. They hesitated. That was their mistake. Because Clint had lit the oil trail. The fire flared bright, racing across the ridge. Two riders panicked and turned tail. Another hit the pit trap and vanished with a scream. Silence returned like a blessing. Hours later, the sheriff arrived with two deputies. The flames from Clint's signal fire had been seen all the way in Dry Hollow. Sheriff Tolan stepped over the wrecked porch and looked at the tied man inside. Well, he said, tipping his hat, that's one bounty I don't mind collecting. He turned to Clint. And you, that was mighty brave, but illegal as all hell. Clint shrugged. Didn't have time for paperwork. Tolan grinned. Let's just say I didn't see the trap, but I did see a man protect his family. Evie stepped forward. Will you hear my story now? The sheriff met her eyes. I've been waiting 15 years to. And as Clint watched her square her shoulders, her hands steady, even after all that fire and noise, he knew something else. She wasn't running anymore, she was standing. And the mountain finally was quiet. The calm didn't last. By morning, the sheriff had taken Warren Granger and the remaining bodies down the pass. leaving behind only silent soot and a broken front door. Clint patched what he could, but there was no fixing the unease in the air. Evie stood by the window, arms crossed tight. "You think they'll come back?" Clint didn't answer right away. He was watching the tree line, same as her. "They will," he finally said. "Warren's just the younger mouth. There's another Granger out there." Evie turned to him, brows furrowed. "There's 3?" Clint nodded slowly. "A half-brother. Name's Levi. Meaner than both and smarter. He keeps to the territory near Sweet Rock, but if he hears his kin got taken, he'll come." Evie closed her eyes for a second. How many men? 5, maybe more. They didn't have time to run. Snow blocked the high pass, and the nearest help was 2 days away by mule. So Clint and Evie did what mountain folk always do when there's nowhere left to go. They dug in. Benny helped Clint pour the last of the kerosene into bottles, wrapping cloth around the necks. "You sure I can do this?" the boy asked, voice wavering just slightly. "You're not throwing unless I say." "But you're ready, son." Lila stuffed dried apples into cloth pouches while Evie sharpened the axe. No one asked questions anymore. They just moved. That night, Clint barely slept. And just before dawn, the sound came. Hooves, many. Levi Granger didn't ride like his brothers. He didn't come screaming down the ridge or firing into the sky. He rode slow, calm, and deliberate, like a banker come to collect debt. He stopped at the cabin fence, boots crunching frost, 5 men behind him, all with rifles, all silent. Inside, Clint moved slow. Benny, to the pantry, Lila under the cot, Evie, I know. She was already at the window. Levi's voice rang out, polite, steady. "Barrow, I hear you got something belongs to me, namely the woman who helped put my brother in shackles." Clint stepped out onto the porch, rifle across his chest. "Warren rode into my land and tried to harm my family. That ain't something you can own." Levi smiled cold. "Family's a funny thing. Eli's dead. Warren's as good as. Leaves me to handle the ledger. You give her over and I walk away. No harm, just settlement." Clint didn't blink. "She's not yours to take." Levi's smile dropped. "Then I suppose we'll collect and fire." The first shot came from Levi's man at the left, splintered the edge of the cabin window. Clint dove back inside, rolled across the floor. Evie fired twice from the back, drove the attackers behind trees. Benny tossed a kerosene bottle from the side hatch. It burst into flame at the fence line, cutting off their retreat. Levi shouted something, then kicked his horse hard. He charged the front, a revolver in one hand, a tomahawk in the other. Evie stepped out from behind the door and aimed, but Benny was faster. From the corner, the boy raised his revolver hands, shaking heart, pounding, and fired once. The shot struck true. Levi tumbled from his horse, dropped hard into the snow. His men hesitated, looked to each other unsure. Another firebomb from Clint crashed into their cover. Flames leapt high. The men scattered. Within seconds, the ridge was clear. It was over. Smoke curled from the snow. The cabin still stood. Benny stood frozen, gun still raised. Clint moved fast, knelt beside him. "It's over, son. You can breathe now." Evie stepped outside, her shawl fluttering in the breeze, Lila clinging to her side. Benny whispered, "I hit him. I wasn't even sure I could." Clint looked him in the eyes. "You protected your family. That's what matters." Evie said nothing for a long moment. Then she crossed to Benny, knelt down, and placed her hand on his shoulder. "You saved all of us," she said. Tears welled in the boy's eyes. He didn't fight them. Inside, Lila drew a picture with ash on the floorboards, 4 stick figures standing in front of a house with smoke curling from the chimney. Evie watched the lines forming her hand, finding Clint's without needing to look. No one said the word family, but no one needed to. The thaw came slow. Snow melted in hushes dripping from the eaves of the cabin, like it didn't want to be noticed. Shoots of green pushed through brown earth. The wind no longer howled, it hummed, a quieter season, one that didn't demand so much fighting. Clint stood by the woodpile, splitting logs with measured rhythm. Each crack of the axe echoed calm, not tension. It was the first time in weeks he didn't look over his shoulder after each swing. Inside, the smell of stew simmered, not just beans and broth, real stew, with onions, potatoes, even dried herbs Evie had gathered from the south slope. She hummed while she stirred a tune Clint didn't know but already liked. Lila sat at the table drawing with real pencils, now not just char from the stove. Her stick figures had faces. Benny was carving wood with a pocket knife, shaping it into something slow and careful. No one mentioned the guns anymore. They stayed under the bed, but they weren't needed. A week after the last snowfall, Sheriff Tolan rode up with a pair of deputies and something folded under his arm. He dismounted slow, not with caution, but respect. Clint met him on the porch. "Didn't expect you back this soon." Tolan held up the folded paper. "Got word from Waverly." The judge tossed the old warrant. Said the witness came forward, swore under oath she saw Levi Granger strike Thomas Quinn. Not Eden. Clint glanced back at the cabin. Evie was standing at the window, her hands still in the dishwater. Tolan smiled. "She's clear, Clint. All the way." Inside, Evie held the paper with trembling hands. "He really signed it," she whispered. Tolan nodded. "Said he should have come forward years ago. Guilt eats slower than fire, but it burns just the same." Evie looked at Clint, tears brimming. "So, I can go back." "You can," Tolan said gently, "but you don't have to." She looked around the cabin, the stew, the ridgeline that had become her home. Then she folded the paper and slid it into the drawer beside the stove. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. A month passed. Benny helped Clint build garden beds near the edge of the ridge. They planted early tomatoes, cabbage, onions. Lila crafted wind chimes out of spoons and string and hung them from the eaves. Evie taught the children to mend socks and make biscuits from scratch. She cut patterns from flour sacks and turned them into dresses. Clint came home one evening to find her showing Benny how to suture a chicken's torn leg. "She's tough," Clint said later that night over tea. "She had to be," Evie replied, "but she doesn't have to be anymore. That's the difference." One morning, Clint handed her something small and smooth, an oak ring. The grain twisted soft through the center. The inside edge was carved with tiny letters, "Home Not Hunted." Evie blinked back tears. "You made this," he nodded. "With what we had." She slipped it on. "You bought me for $3, Clint Barrow." He looked at her eyes steady. "No. I bought time. The rest you gave me." She touched his hand. "Folks used to ask what my name meant." "Eden. It was a place they thought you had to leave behind." He leaned in close, voice low. "Maybe it's a place you build." That spring, Cold River saw its earliest bloom in 20 years. Flowers spilled down the ridge like spilled paint. Kids ran barefoot in the thaw. Folks who hadn't spoken in seasons came back to church to rodeos to one another. And in a little cabin on Silver Bend, a woman who once carved her name into fence posts learned how to plant it instead, deep in soil, in hands, in hearts. They never did move back to town. Didn't have to. Because home, they realized, wasn't about land or papers or what came before. It was about who stayed. And Evie Eden was staying. Subscribe for more stories of second chances, true grit, and the kind of love you build from scratch. Drop a sun if you believe healing starts when someone says you're safe now.